In the heart of Lagos, where the streets buzz with life and the air carries the scent of roasted plantain and exhaust fumes, there stood a church that commanded respect. The Fire of Glory Ministries, led by the renowned pastor Gabriel Adeyemi, was more than just a church. It was an empire. Every Sunday, the roads leading to the church were packed with expensive cars, Okadas weaving through the traffic as church members hurried to secure a seat. The church auditorium, a massive structure adorned with golden chandeliers and a red-carpeted altar, was always filled to capacity. If you came late, you stood outside with the crowd, watching the sermon on large LED screens. Pastor Gabriel was a man whose words carried weight. His deep, commanding voice could send shivers down your spine. His sermons were fiery, his prayers powerful, and his miracles unquestionable. People swore by his anointing. I was barren for 10 years, but when Pastor Gabriel laid hands on me, I conceived twins, one woman testified. My business was failing until I sowed a seed of faith. Now I own 3 supermarkets, another man declared, waving his car keys. The people loved him. They believed in him. To them, he was a true man of God, a direct messenger from heaven. But behind the grandeur, behind the polished smile and designer suits, Pastor Gabriel carried secrets. Dark, dangerous secrets. One evening, after a powerful midweek service, he sat in his lavish office, his fingers drumming against his mahogany desk. The scent of expensive cologne lingered in the air. As he picked up his phone, a text message popped up from an unknown number. God is watching you. Change your ways before it's too late. He stared at the message for a moment, then chuckled softly, deleting it without a second thought. Little did he know, his past was about to catch up with him. And this time, there would be no miracle to save him. For the first 2 weeks, everything seemed perfect. Ruth Okafor, a 27-year-old woman with big dreams and even bigger responsibilities, was now working as the personal assistant to the great pastor Gabriel Adeyemi. To outsiders, it was a divine opportunity, a stepping stone to greater things. After all, who wouldn't want to work closely with such a powerful man of God? But for Ruth, it was not about glory. It was about survival. Her mother was sick, bedridden in their small family home in Aba, and the medical bills never seemed to stop. Ruth needed the money, and this job was an answered prayer. She was determined to work hard and mind her business, but sometimes prayers come with hidden tests. At first, Pastor Gabriel was nothing but kind. He praised her dedication and work ethic, often smiling warmly as he spoke. Ruth, you are very smart and hardworking. I wish all my staff were like you. Thank you, sir, she replied politely, keeping her head down. But then the small things began to happen. The compliments came too often. You look beautiful today, he said one morning, eyeing her from behind his desk. That dress suits you. Ruth felt a knot tighten in her stomach, but she forced a smile. Thank you, sir. Then came the lingering stares, the way his eyes followed her around the office when he thought she wasn't looking. Something felt off. One evening, just as Ruth was about to leave, Pastor Gabriel called her back. Ruth, I want us to talk, he said, his voice smooth. She hesitated but sat down. You're different, he continued. There's something special about you. Ruth swallowed hard. A woman like you deserves to be appreciated, he added, his eyes holding hers. Her heart pounded. This was not just work talk anymore. That night, she lay awake replaying his words. Why is he saying these things? She wondered. Deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The uneasy feeling in Ruth Okafor's stomach refused to go away. It had been weeks since she started working as Pastor Gabriel Adeyemi's personal assistant, and things were beginning to shift in a way she didn't like. The lines between work and something else, something dangerous, were becoming blurry. She noticed it in the way Pastor Gabriel looked at her like a boss looking at his employee, but like a hunter watching his prey. It started with the compliments. You are a rare gem, Ruth, he would say, his deep voice smooth like honey, a woman of grace and beauty. Then came the accidental touches, a brush of his fingers against hers when she handed him a document, the way he placed his hand on her shoulder a little too long when explaining something. One afternoon, the office was quiet. Most of the staff had gone home, but Pastor Gabriel was still in his office. The intercom buzzed. "Ruth, please come to my office." Her heart skipped a beat. She gathered her notebook and pen, telling herself it was just work. She knocked softly before stepping inside. "Come in, Ruth, sit down," Pastor Gabriel said with a smile, motioning to the chair across from him. She sat, her notebook in hand, ready to take notes. But Pastor Gabriel leaned forward, his eyes serious. "Ruth, you know you're special, don't you?" She frowned slightly, unsure of where this was going. "Thank you, sir," she said cautiously. "No, I mean it," he continued, reaching out to hold her hand. "You are not just hard-working, you're beautiful, graceful, a woman of class." Ruth quickly pulled her hand away, a knot tightening in her stomach. "Sir, I think we should focus on work," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Pastor Gabriel smiled, but this smile was different. It was sly, filled with something unspoken. "Ruth, in life, there are opportunities that come only once," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're in a position many women would do anything to have." Ruth's heartbeat quickened. She knew exactly what he was saying. "Sir, I'm just here to do my job," she replied firmly. Pastor Gabriel's smile faded slightly. "Let me be clear with you," he said, his voice lower. "There are many beautiful ladies out there who are ready to do anything to take your position. If you want to keep your job, you should think about how to be flexible." Ruth felt her heart drop. She stood up quickly. "Sir, if there's nothing else, I'd like to get back to work." Pastor Gabriel waved her off dismissively. "Go, but think about what I said. Don't make me regret giving you this opportunity." As Ruth walked out of the office, her mind raced. She knew she couldn't give in to his demands, but she also knew she needed this job. What was she going to do? The sun burned hot over Lagos, but inside Ruth's heart, there was nothing but ice. It had been a week since Pastor Gabriel Adeyemi made his intentions clear, and Ruth had been walking on eggshells ever since. She avoided being alone with him, kept her responses short, and focused on her work. But deep down, she knew it was only a matter of time before he made his next move. And she was right. One morning, as she entered the office, a white envelope sat on her desk. Her name was printed neatly on the front. With shaky fingers, she opened it. "This is to inform you that your services are no longer required. Please return all company property immediately." Ruth's heart stopped. Fired? Just like that? She rushed to Pastor Gabriel's office, her hands shaking as she knocked. "Sir, please, I need to talk to you," she pleaded. The pastor's personal bodyguard, a tall, muscular man in a black suit, stepped in front of the door. "Oga is busy." Ruth stood frozen, tears welling in her eyes. This was his punishment. He had given her an ultimatum, and because she refused, he had made sure she paid the price. She gathered her belongings in a small box, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. As she walked out of the church compound, people whispered, "Why is she leaving so suddenly? Did she do something wrong?" Ruth ignored them, her vision blurry with unshed tears. She thought of her mother back in Aba, sick and waiting for the money she had promised to send. How would she survive now? For weeks, she searched for another job, but Lagos was an unforgiving city. Every door she knocked on stayed shut. The little savings she had disappeared, and soon even food became a luxury. Then, one evening, as she sat in her tiny one-room apartment staring at her last N500 note, her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then picked up. "Ruth." Her stomach twisted. She knew that voice. "Pastor Gabriel. Come to my office tomorrow morning. Let's talk." Her fingers tightened around the phone. She knew what this was. But desperation is a dangerous thing. And right now, Ruth had nothing to lose. Ruth barely slept that night. She tossed and turned on her small mattress, staring at the ceiling as her mind raced. Should she go? Should she walk back into the lion's den? Her mother's frail voice echoed in her mind. "Ruth, my daughter, God will bless you for all your sacrifices." Tears welled in her eyes. She had no choice. The next morning, she put on her best dress, a simple blue gown that covered her knees, and made her way back to the Fire of Glory Ministries. Her palms were sweaty as she walked into the grand building, the very place she had been humiliated weeks ago. The secretary barely looked up as Ruth walked past, straight to Pastor Gabriel's office. When she stepped inside, he was already waiting. A smug smile played on his lips. "Ah, Ruth," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." Ruth swallowed the lump in her throat. "I need my job back, sir. Things are hard for me." Pastor Gabriel studied her for a moment, tapping his fingers on his desk. Then he smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You see, Ruth, I gave you an opportunity, but you acted like you were too holy for it." He shook his head. "Now you say you'll do anything?" Her heart pounded. She forced herself to nod. "Good," Pastor Gabriel said, his voice low and smooth. "You can have your job back, but you must promise to be loyal. No more acting like you're better than me." Ruth felt bile rise in her throat, but she forced the words out. "Yes, sir." Pastor Gabriel grinned. "Good. Come back on Monday." Ruth turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "And Ruth, no more secrets between us, right?" She nodded and walked out, her knees feeling weak. That night, she made a decision. She would play along, but this time, she would be smart. She bought a new phone with a recording app. Every conversation, every text message, she would keep records, because this time she wasn't going to be the victim. This time she was setting a trap of her own. The courtroom was packed. It seemed like everyone in Lagos had come to witness the scandal that had rocked the city. Whispers filled the air as people craned their necks to get a better view of the two main characters in this drama, Pastor Gabriel Adiemi, the once revered man of God, and Ruth Okafor, his former assistant. Ruth sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Beside her, her lawyer, Barrister Chuka, leaned in. "Stay calm, Ruth," he whispered. "The truth will come out today." Across the room, Pastor Gabriel sat with his lawyer. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. He looked nothing like the confident, powerful man who used to command thousands from the pulpit. His wife, Grace, sat in the audience, her face a mask of cold anger. The judge entered, and the murmurs died down. The gavel banged, and the trial began. Pastor Gabriel's lawyer was the first to speak. He stood, painting a picture of Ruth as a manipulative woman who had deceived the innocent pastor. "This is a case of deliberate harm," he declared, his voice ringing through the courtroom. "The defendant, Ruth Okafor, knowingly transmitted a dangerous disease to my client. She kept her condition a secret, putting his life at risk." Ruth's heart pounded in her chest. The weight of the accusation was heavy. When it was Barrister Chuka's turn, he stood confidently. "Your Honor, my client is not the villain here. She is a victim of abuse of power." He held up a file. "We have text messages and voice recordings that show how Pastor Gabriel coerced her into a relationship. He used his position to intimidate and manipulate her." The courtroom fell silent as he played a recording. In the audio, Pastor Gabriel's voice was unmistakable. "Ruth, if you want to keep this job, you know what to do. Many girls would kill to be in your position." Gasps filled the room. Pastor Gabriel's face turned pale. Barrister Chuka continued. "This is not the voice of a victim. This is the voice of a predator." Then, he called a surprise witness, a young woman named Nkem. She stood nervously, but her voice was clear. "Pastor Gabriel did the same thing to me," she testified. "He promised to help me if I did what he wanted. When I refused, he fired me." One after the other, more women stood up, each sharing similar stories. The courtroom buzzed with shock and outrage. When Pastor Gabriel was called to the stand, he stammered, trying to defend himself. I am a man of God. These women are lying." Barrister Chuka didn't hesitate. "If you are a man of God, Pastor Gabriel, why did you meet Ruth in hotels? Why did you threaten her job?" The pastor had no answer. The judge banged the gavel, calling for order. After a tense pause, he spoke. "The evidence is clear. Ruth is not guilty of the charges against her." The courtroom erupted, some in relief, others in anger. Pastor Gabriel slumped in his seat, his reputation shattered. Ruth stood, her legs shaky. She was free, but the journey had left scars. As she walked out of the courtroom, she looked up at the sky, her heart heavy but determined. In the end, the truth had come to light, and the powerful man who thought he could hide behind his title had fallen from grace.